Good morning, friends. I hope everyone is doing well. I request everyone to watch my videos in a sequence for better understanding. If you really like my videos, please press the like button, share the videos with your friends, subscribe to my channel, and also press the bell button to get the regular updates. In this video, I want to discuss about IP addressing and how the IP address is classified into network ID and the host ID. Okay, then we will discuss about classful addressing and classless addressing in detail. So I request everyone to watch the video completely for a better understanding. Now, what is an IP address? IP address is useful to identify a device or a node which is connected in a network. Okay, so if we have an IP address, then we can connect to the internet. Am I right or wrong? So IP address can be even call it as a logical address. Okay, now in which layer of the OSI it will come? It will come in the network layer of the OSI. Am I right or wrong? Because in data link layer, we have the MAC address, which is a 48-bit address. When it comes to the network layer, we have an IP address. Based on the version, we have the bits. If it is IP version 4, we have a 32-bit. If it is IP version 6, we have a 128-bit. When it comes to the transport layer, we have the service point address, which we even call it as a port address, which is of 16-bit. So, this IP address or logical address which will come in the network layer. Now it has two versions as I said earlier. We have IP version 4, IP version 6. Now IP version 4 which is having 32-bit IP address and IP version 6 has a 128-bit address. Now in this series I will discuss about the IP version 4 and in the coming videos I will discuss about the IP version 6 in detail. Okay, so now you can ask me, sir, this IP version 4 32 bits are there, what it consists of? It consists of basically two parts. If you take any IP address, it will consist of two parts. One is the network ID. Okay, it consists of network ID and another one is the host ID. Then you can ask me, what is the use of a network ID and what is the use of a host ID? Let's take that two networks are there. Okay, they are connected with a router. In between I have a router, and let's take that not two networks, suppose some multiple networks are there. Okay, now a device within this network want to communicate with a device in this network. Let's take that I have a network N1, network N2, network N3, network N4. Now what this node, it has to transfer the data to the node B which is there in the another network. So it will send a packet. Okay, consists of the IP address of the destination. Is it clear? Are you able to understand? So the destination IP address will be there. Now it comes to the router. Now router will identify which network it should go. But how it will identify, we will discuss with the help of subnet mask, all these things we will discuss. But now let me tell you one thing. This network ID will be useful for us to identify the network. Are you able to understand? So we have multiple networks are there. The network ID will be useful for us to identify the network. Means the destination is there in which network. Whether the destination is there in the network 2 or network 3, network 4 can be able to identify with the help of a network ID in the IP address of the destination. Now you can ask me, what is the use of the host ID? In this network, maybe you can have more than one device or one node can be there, more than one node can be there. Like let's take that node C, node E, node F, all these are the hosts or nodes are there. Now, once you reach to the packet reach to the network, it has to identify what is the host ID. Should it send to the node C, B, E, F? How it can able to identify with the help of the host ID. So what I want to say is that The network ID will be useful for us to identify the network, and host ID will be useful for us to identify the host. Okay, now you can ask me the next question. So 32 bits are there. How should I represent? Is it clear? You are saying that it consists of network ID, host ID, all these things, it is okay. But how to represent an IP address? Okay, how to represent? Now, as you know that it is a binary number. Am I right? So it can be 1 or 0 like this. So you can ask me that's a 32 bits I will represent in terms of ones and zeros. Yeah, you can do it. But the better way of representation is that we will say dotted decimal representation. Okay, what is meant by this dotted decimal representation I will discuss now. So IP address usually represent using the help of dotted decimal representation. As it is a 32 bit, we can divide into 4 octets. Meaning is that 8 bits dot 8 bits dot 8 bits dot 8 bits. Are you able to understand? So you have totally 32 bits address is there for the IP version 4. So you are representing 8 bits separated with a dot, 8 bits separated with a dot, the 8 bits separated with a dot, 8 bits separated with a dot. So that's why we call it as a dotted. Now why it is called as a decimal? Now this 8 bits I will convert into a decimal number. Are you able to understand? Suppose let's take that these 8 bits are 8 ones are there. 3, 6, 8 ones are there. Now what is this 1? If I convert into decimal number, it is very simple. 2 power 8 minus 1, which is nothing but 256 minus 1, 255. If you have a 3 ones, 2 power 3 minus 1, which is 7, when you convert into decimal number. So maximum you can have 255.255.255.255. So if you keep all 32 ones, then you can have 255.255.255.255. So that's why it is called as a dotted. You are separating them with the dots. I hope these dots are visible for you. Okay, and it is a decimal number. So each 8 bits we will represent with a decimal number, and each 8 bit is separated with a dotted. So that's why it is called as dotted decimal representation. Now you can ask me, sir, you said that network ID is there, host ID is there with the 32 bit. How can I identify how many bits are allocated for the network ID, how many bits are allocated for the host ID? By seeing the IP address. You are saying that IP address is classified as a, means represented as a dotted decimal representation. If I see a IP address, my institute is using 172 dot something or 200 dot something, how many bits are there for the network ID, how many bits are there for the host ID, how should I identify? So to identify that one, we have 2 types of IP address representation. One is that instead of saying representation, it can be classified into 2 types. One is classful IP addressing, and we have classless IP addressing. Okay. Now what is meant by classful IP addressing? We have a class A, class B, class C, class D and class E. Totally 5 classes are there in the classful IP address. Now each class, if you identify the IP address whatever it is there, in which class it belongs to, if you can identify, then easily you can identify how many bits are allocated for the network ID, how many bits are allocated for the host ID. Coming to the classless IP address, it will be represented as A.B.C.D/N. Now you can ask me, what is this A.B.C.D, which is some IP address. Okay, is it clear? /n means number of bits are allocated for the network ID part or the block ID part. So let's take that simple example I am taking. If I say that 10.1.2.3. Okay, / some 10 if I write, then meaning is that 10 bits are allocated for the network ID. Okay, now totally you have 32 bits. Out of 32 bits, 10 bits are allocated for the network ID. How many bits are there for the host ID? Remaining 22 bits are there for the host ID. So, if it is a classless IP address, you can easily identify by seeing this n. So, this n value, whatever it is there, it will tell the how many bits are allocated for the network ID and the remaining bits are allocated for the host ID. When it comes to the classful, based on the class A, class B, class C, class D, class E, based on that one, if it is a class A, 8 bits are allocated for the network ID, remaining 24 bits are allocated for the host ID. When it comes to the class B, 16 bits are allocated for the network ID, 16 bits are allocated for the host ID. All these things like what is the range, by seeing the range also we can easily identify in which IP address class it belongs to. All these things we will discuss in the next video. I hope you have understood what is an IP address and in which layer it comes and how to represent an IP address and what is a network ID, what is a host ID, what is a classful IP address and what is a classless IP address. All these things I hope you have understood. If you still have any doubts related to these concepts, feel free to ask me your doubts in the comment section. I will try to clear your doubts in less than 24 hours. Thank you for watching my video. Have a nice day.